it's really about a shift. It's about an imbalance in the internal ecosystem. And I want to say that when we really get into dysbiosis, it is, I believe, one of the great epidemics of our time. You know, nowadays, everything we're studying is about inflammation. Everything's inflammatory, right? Heart disease, diabetes, cancer, osteoarthritis, all those itises, right? They're all inflammatory conditions. And really, guys, that's all about the immune system. It really is. I think some people think of the immune system as being exclusively relating to colds and flus and fighting off bacteria and viruses and protozoa. When you really get into the immune system, it's really almost more of the maintenance machinery. It's what keeps all your tissues constantly regenerating. And so we should think of the immune system as really more of like the mechanic who lives in your body who actually fabricates parts and repairs all the machinery on an ongoing basis. And if that system goes awry, then we'll end up having all these dysfunctions. And right now in medicine, I think that we're often chasing around different inflammatory conditions and naming them different things depending on where they manifest in the body, right? So if you have inflammation of the beta cells in your pancreas, we're going to call that diabetes. If you have inflammation of the neurons in your brain, we're going to call that dementia. If you have inflammation of the synovial cushioning in the joints, we're going to call that osteoarthritis, right? And nowadays, we're just chasing inflammation around. It's a one process. It's your immune machinery working, regenerating and rebuilding all those tissues. And when that stuff breaks down, there's a lot of suffering that's going to ensue. And we're going to talk a lot about how the gut plays really one of the dominant roles. Guys, your gut is really where a lot of the immune cells reside. You'll hear all these stats, all these statistics, different quotes, that 70 or 80% of all the immune cells reside in the gut, and we'll talk about that. It's true. So I want to get into talking about probiotics. First off, guys, probiotics, we should understand we have a lot of critters in our colon. Has anybody heard the number? I mean, commonly you hear the word 100 trillion, 100 trillion cells. This is upwards of 3 pounds of bacteria. There are actually more bacteria in your colon than humans who have ever lived on Earth, ever, throughout human history. If you aggregated all the 7 billion humans, which is a tiny number compared to 100 trillion, we have a lot of bacteria. And what we've learned about these bacteria is they do a lot of things for human health, and we'll talk about what exactly they do. Right now, almost every American has beaten up their intestines. They have done all these modern things, and these are very modern examples I'm giving. They have done a lot that has really chipped away and demolished their internal ecosystem. It is really a whole microcosm. It's like a little universe in your gut. Literally, I mean, it's a huge microbiome, whatever you want to call it. It really has a lot to do with health. So why do almost every Americans have dysbiosis? Let's talk about why. And before I even go into the reasons, let's acknowledge that dysbiosis is not like an on or an off. It's not like you have it or you don't. It's usually a matter of degree. It's a continuum where some people have it just a little bit. Some people have it a little worse. Some people have really what's bread mold growing in their lungs, and it's darn near fatal. You know, I mean, there's a huge continuum, right? So let's talk about why almost every American is now on this continuum, starting with birthing. Guys, C-sections, cesarean delivery makes up over 50% of all births. This is an old statistic. 30% is very old. It's now over half. And what we're learning about C-sections is that it changes the bowel forever unless you start re-inoculating and trying to repair it. You can heal, but many Americans won't. It's not even on the radar. They're not even trying. They don't even know what this is. And here's the deal. Babies, when they're being born, they go through the urogenital tract and they swallow trillions of microbes in the mother's flora, right? And the mother is passing on what bacteria she has, and that's turning out to be a very profound thing that we're learning. It's almost scary how much of your immune system is imprinted in the very first few hours of your life, and that when they cut you out of the mother and put her on antibiotics, that's going to change the ecosystem in terms of what microbes are living in the bowel. And I've now read papers on this. There's published research where doctors will look at 8-year-old and 9-year-old children, right, 9 years later, and they look at their stool, right? They examine their poop, and they can find out who was vaginally born and who was cesarean delivered 8 years later, right? And again, I don't want to say that if you were cesarean delivered or you had to go through that when you had a child and you were pregnant, that doesn't mean that your child is screwed forever. I want to be very clear. You can heal from this But again, most Americans won't, and they're going to continue to do the rest of these things, right? Like they're going to do formula feeding, which really has a very low amount of bacteria compared to breast milk. Very low. It has some, but not near enough. We talk about chlorinated water. Why do we put chlorine in the water? To kill bugs, right? To kill pathogens. And sometimes that ends up affecting our good microbial defense guys too. So it basically knocks down certain microbes. This would also include bromine, brominated flours. Since the 1940s, we're now using very toxic gases as a mold inhibitor. And most commercial non-organic flours use the toxic ingredient bromine. They'll use fluorine in the water, right, in toothpastes. These are metals that kind of degrade certain bacteria. I'm not saying it's like an antibiotic where it strips out everything, but it has a mild effect of degrading certain strains that live in your colon. We also talk about high sugar diets. This is a big one. You guys know this, right? Sugar is really damaging. And the deal is that our diets, as generations of human beings on Earth, we are now eating far more sugar than any human who has ever lived. Right? I mean, I looked at records dating back the 1800s or 1700s or whatever, and when you look at dating back records, you find that traditional cultures, whether they were Victorians or Asians or early American colonials, they would tend to eat 3 to 5 pounds per person per year. That's a pretty typical background level for many primitive groups of humans. Now it's over 130 pounds per person per year, right? And we see it everywhere. Refined corn syrup, refined sugars, refined grains that basically turn into sugar once you digest them. I mean, these are high energy fuels that go into the gut and feed all the opportunists, right? Lots of opportunistic microbes that in their own right aren't necessarily all bad. Like Candida. How many people here have heard of Candida albicans? Good, most of you. Guys, Candida often get vilified. Everybody says, oh, I have Candida. And we all have Candida, truly. Every single human on Earth has Candida. It's really a matter of whether you have allowed Candida to grow and proliferate and change its morphology and become a mature, virulent, spore-forming bad guy. Candida in its more immature forms isn't all bad. It actually has some useful functions for our immune signals. We kind of want some of those critters. They're just opportunistic. They're not all pathogens. They actually can become bad. It depends on the internal environment and what defenses are there. So guys, high sugar diets are a big one. Birth control pills or contraceptives, right? We're talking about what's in the water, what's in there's a lot of residues, contraceptive residues. Of course, women are on these for many, many years. Pesticides and fungicides and herbicides, right? These have an effect of killing various microbes too. And then, of course, antibiotics. I mean, you knew that was coming. Antibiotics are really powerful. Many of these broad-spectrum antibiotics out there, the best-selling one is called Z-Pak. It's a 5-day, short course, very broad-spectrum antibiotic called zithromycin. And azithromycin is really turning out that it demolishes a lot of your good flora for maybe months or years to come. I mean, those things are more permanent than people think. I'm not saying antibiotics are all bad. Boy, there's a time and a place where they should be used, right? For sure. Nobody's going to deny that antibiotics are a wonderful thing to have available. But I think right now they're being overused. They're being overprescribed, even for viral situations, which, of course, antibiotics have no benefit for viruses. And then we see it in the food supply, right? Especially in the meat, the eggs, the dairy. Even the water supply often has measurable concentrations in the water of certain antibiotics, the different macrolides or penicillins. And then finally, alcohol. That's maybe the one that's fairly old. Humans have been eating alcohol for a long time. Of course, now it's a little more industrial, commercial versions that are more refined. They're not drinking mead, which would have some probiotic value, or homemade brewed beers, which are fermented and have some benefits. Now it's all commercial distilled stuff with, really doesn't have all those good bacteria. So I know this is kind of a depressing list. I'm sorry about that. But I want to point out to you guys that most of these are fairly new. Think about how many generations ago this all started. Did your great-great-grandma, did she do C-sections and formula feeding and contraceptives and birth, all these pesticides and fungicides and antibiotics? And, you get my point, right? That we have in 5 or 6 generations introduced a lot of things into our environment that are actively beating up our intestines. And that's one of the big reasons why almost every American is now on the continuum of dysbiosis and has a dysbiotic colon, right? The other big factor that really exacerbates and compounds the whole issue here, not only are we chipping away and sterilizing and stripping out a lot of good bacteria, we're also failing to seed our intestines. We're failing to eat cultured, fermented, or pickled foods. Think about ancient history, right? Did you have a fridge hundreds of years ago? Did everybody have a refrigerator in their home? No, obviously not. How did they preserve food? If they wanted to survive to the next harvest, they had to find a way to preserve and make the food available and make sure it didn't spoil. And they usually used, this is like a bottle of sauerkraut, or you've seen kimchi, or there's miso soup, or yogurt, or kefir, or there's hundreds of different fermented foods from every pocket of the world. You know, people figured this out independently of each other. They figured out whether they're in some South Pacific island or whether they're in northern Canada, they figured out they needed to ferment or culture or somehow preserve food. And guys, this type of old school preserving gives you a lot of bacteria. You're getting a lot of probiotics. And I should mention that the versions we have nowadays are mostly a watered-down industrial Mickey Mouse version that don't have near the benefits of traditional, homemade, authentic versions. Right? And I'm loath to admit I would even include a lot of health food store brands, you know, Stonyfield Farms yogurt and Brown Cow yogurt and things like that. These are, you know, they start from pasteurized milk. They use all kinds of, they do a short fermentation. They add thickeners. They truck it. It's shipped for 2 weeks before you eat it. I mean, it's just, I don't want to say it's worthless, but guys, modern yogurts, unless you're making homemade kefir, unless you're making homemade sauerkraut, I would say you're generally not getting the authentic version. I mean, unless you're buying rejuvenative foods, or there's a few artisanal brands out there that they probably carry here at Natur-Tyme that actually are maybe more legitimate. But I'll tell you what, if you've never had homemade sauerkraut, please sometime give it a shot. It may change you into really somebody who likes sauerkraut. I hated sauerkraut for much of my life because I'd only had the store-bought versions, which I think are often like mush. They're just gross. The homemade stuff is different. So anyway, guys, this is a big change. When we talk about why almost every American now has some degree of intestinal imbalance or dysbiosis, whatever you want to call it, this is, I think, the two big reasons. We've actively changed our gut by stripping out a lot of good strains with all these modern assaults, and we've failed to seed our intestines. Question? Imbalance of bacterial population. This is what dysbiosis is. Right. There's a whole, I mean, we really have over 1,500 different species, and we don't have complete understanding of what every single one does. This is really in its infancy. The Human Microbiome Project is one of the biggest kind of investigations into this specific question. What we're seeing, though, is that it's less of the good physiological strains that produce good enzymes and good acids and B vitamins and peptide hormones and really participate in our physiology. They would call those commensal strains. Commensal comes from the Latin word to share a table, right? So commensal strains would be like what a microbiologist would say. Those are indigenous. Those are physiological strains that participate in your physiology. Then we have other opportunistic strains that aren't necessarily all bad, but can become problematic, like Prevotella. When they grow up, they have all kinds of bad effects, or Bacteroides that chop down lots of sugar compounds, or Candida, which actually can signal the immune system and provide a little bit of stress, which actually stress is not all bad in your immune system. You know, we wouldn't have an immune system if it weren't for these microbes, basically. I mean, this is part of how the human immune system develops in the first place. We have to have some internal stress. I know that's kind of a little bit of an abstract concept to present right now. But I will say what we're also looking at are the downright pathogens. So we have the physiological strains, the good guys. Then we have the opportunistic strains, which kind of a gray area in the middle. Then you have the straight-up bad guys, pathogens, that are known to cause pathology in the body. This would be things like blastocystis or Giardia or very nasty strains of E. coli, stuff like that. Does that make sense? So it's about trying to maintain your ecosystem, that teeming mass of bacteria. We're trying to maintain the good guys and make sure the bad guys don't get a big leg up and create a huge turf war that will tank our immune system. So let's talk about that. I want to get into Metchnikoff. This is the guy who did the first research on probiotics. I wanted to follow up my idea of how we're not eating cultured food and point out that the first guy who did research on this over 100 years ago, this guy won a Nobel Prize. He's one of the fathers of immunology, Dr. Metchnikoff. Russian man. And he was actually looking around Europe in the early 1900s, studying longevity, trying to figure out who lives the longest based on birth and death records, right? Took a whole team of researchers and went through European countries and studied their longevity records. And he found that most Europeans at that time, this is 1905, 1906, they were dying in their 50s, most of the countries. Then he went to southern Bulgaria and the Caucasus Mountains, very remote region, not a lot of roads. Railroads had not really been built to that area. So they're not living on flowers and sugars and tea and crumpets and biscuits and crackers and jams and all those foods of commerce, because they hadn't been developed yet in this part of the world. It's very mountainous, very remote. And when Mechnikov went there, he found that their average life expectancies were somewhere in the mid-80s. This is in 1905, guys. You realize our life expectancy today in the U.S. isn't that good. So there was a lot of questions like, how in the heck are these peasants living on very primitive foods? How are they living so long? And what he found right away was, well, they're not living on all these refined, damaged foods. In fact, they're eating tons of the famous Bulgarian yogurt, creme bulgare, right, as they would call it. There's also all kinds of colloquial names for it. And he investigated it and found they were found to be eating a lot. In fact, every man, woman, and child was observed, aggregated out, an average, was about a half liter a day. That's a pint a day. We're talking, he estimated upwards of 50 billion microorganisms, right? So 50 billion microorganisms, many probiotics and some just commensal other strains. And how much C-sections do you suppose they were doing in 1905 in Bulgaria? How much antibiotic residues? How many pesticides? How much birth control pill? How much refined sugar? You guys get my point, right? That in 5 generations, we have really done a double whammy to the intestinal ecosystem of most Westerners. And their guts look very different than they did even 2 or 3 generations ago. And the downward spiral is continuing as more and more Americans continue to eat highly refined diets that are made up a lot of trans fats and corn syrup and GMOs and chemical slurries of all these weird preservatives and chemicals. Question? This mucusless diet? Yeah. It depends. I'm not that familiar. There's so many versions of the mucusless diet. Many times they're saying, get off of meat and dairy, which I don't fully agree with. I think it depends on the type of dairy and meat you're eating and how well you digest it. I think anything that's undigested, even soybean paste, can be very mucus-forming if your body's not digesting it well. So generally, I think some of those books, they use one concept and try to apply every element of health to this one simplistic idea, and I think it's a little bit of tunnel vision and reductionist. Not to say it's all bad. I haven't even read it, so I don't know. It depends on. But a lot of those books over the years I've seen, which are so-called mucusless or low mucus diets, are often just getting you off of. A lot of people think that animal proteins are the bane of human health, and that if it's meat or dairy, or eggs, then they're horrible, terrible, no good. And I think it depends on the person. Some people really do better without meat and dairy in their diet. Some people do much better with them, and it depends on their digestive capability. We'll talk about that, actually. That's a good segue. I do want to go into how many strains there are. I kind of mentioned this, guys. There's a lot of different organisms in your colon. We're talking over 1,000 different species. Most people have only heard of Lactobacillus acidophilus and Lactobacillus paracasei and Bifidobacterium lactis or longum, and really there's a lot more than that. Huge, teeming, it's like a universe, right? How many species are in the forest? A lot. So when we talk about what good bacteria do, what do the good guys do? Fundamentally, why should you eat probiotic food? Why should you take probiotic pills? And this is really the big 3 in my mind. Number 1, acids. We call them lactic acid bacteria, LABs, or AKA probiotics, same thing. We call them acidophilus, is one of the most well-known strains. The name acidophilus literally means lover of acid. That's actually what it means. It's acidophile, right? It's an acidophilic strain. So that means it's a lover of acid. Many people out there over the years I've seen have become confused about acid and pH. And there's a lot of books out there that I think do a, frankly, terrible job. If you've ever heard the idea that acid is bad for human health, there's all these books that say, alkaline good, acid bad. And that is so false and so really silly. that it makes our whole industry kind of look stupid and non-scientific and unsophisticated. Guys, here's the reality. Acids are fundamentally profound in human health. You have to have acid to live. Acids are a barrier. They are a defensive barrier. If you fail to acidify your bowel, your colon should always be maintained a little bit acidic. We're not talking like sulfuric acid or like your stomach. But it should be a mild acidic condition, always. And if you fail to acidify the colon and the bowel, I mean, the small intestine is actually alkaline because there's watery bicarbonates, which your body makes very alkaline, baking soda type products that go into your gut. So you actually have like acids and then alkaline and then acids. It's a whole sequence. But to say acids are bad, I mean, that's stupid. Guys, your skin is a good example. If your skin was not acidic, your skin, if you actually test the dermal membranes of a human or any mammal's skin, they're often referred to as the acid mantle. You know why you need acids on your skin? Because if you didn't have acids, mold spores could land right there and start growing a big patch of moldy moss right on the surface of your skin. That wouldn't be very good, would it? You get my point, right? The stomach is also one of the main defenses. If you have low stomach acidity, you will have way more infections. Way more microbes can start getting in there and infiltrating your body and gaining access to your lymph and blood. Guys, acids are important. If you ever hear somebody say, well, cancer cannot grow in an alkaline environment, please know that that is completely bunk. That theory collapsed really in the 1920s. Cancers routinely grow in alkaline environments. Now, acidosis of the cell, when they produce acid, that has seen in cancer, but it's an effect of the cancer. It's when the cell's machinery are breaking down and all the respiratory, all the process that would normally handle acid wastes are broken. That's an effect of cancer, not a cause. In any case, guys, acids are a fundamental thing that good bacteria help your body, especially in the colon, to maintain that acidic regimen. This is kind of like sprouting, too. You guys ever done any sprouting? Especially like certain sprouts are known to be more prone to mold, like broccoli sprouts are pretty well known. And that's why if you look at a sprouting section or if you read sprouting books, they'll say, sprinkle a little citric acid in your soak water. So when you rinse the sprouts, you just get a little mild acid in the sprouts. That's a very potent mold inhibitor. Right? Just like in sprouting. Same thing is kind of going on in your gut. If you fail to acidify, you will allow opportunists like Candida and other molds to really grow. Next up are enzymes. And enzymes, these may be the most important. Enzymes do a lot of things, and it's not just digestion. Most people, when they hear the word enzyme, their mind goes into food enzymes and how the digestive enzymes break. They're almost like chemical scissors. They chop and they cleave and they break down all the foods, and this makes them absorbable. This is what allows them to drain. It's what allows them to be absorbed, broken down into little component parts. Enzymes, though, are not just about digestion. These enzymes have a lot to do with your thyroid gland. We'll talk about that. These enzymes have a lot to do with neurotransmitters in your brain. They have a lot to do with your immune signals, like all those cytokines that regulate your immune system in very profound ways. I mean, these enzymes have a lot to do with other systems of the body. And maybe that might be the most profound of the three. Even compared to acids, which are hard to say which one's more important. But I think the enzymes play out in so many different discussions of human health. In many areas that people didn't think were connected to the gut, like the brain. How is the brain affected by enzymes in the colon, right? That's an odd thing. Finally, vitamins. It's not just acids and enzymes. The final thing are vitamins. You produce B vitamins and K vitamins and certain peptide hormones are made in the gut all day long, even between meals. So this is really fundamentally what probiotics do for human health. It's the big three: acids, enzymes, vitamins. Right? So let's move on and talk about biofilms. This is one of the things you'll see when you fail to acidify the bowel and you allow lots of opportunists and pathogens to start growing. They will spread out these sticky, slimy, glue-like coatings. Many Americans have these. This is a picture of somebody's intestine, an endoscopic image where you're looking down the lumen of their gut, and you're seeing this. You can't really see it very well. There's all kinds of white, mucousy films that have coated their mucosal wall of their small intestine. And this is a bad deal. Guys, biofilms really do loom large in a lot of areas of, especially like sinus problems, a lot of people with gallbladder issues, a lot of people with chronic immune problems. A lot of them have lots of biofilm accumulated in their body. Not all biofilms are bad, but when you allow bad guys to produce these films, and they actually kind of live in them. It's like millions of organisms will live in a film, and they'll actually call it a biofilm, with millions of organisms all living in it, and they'll actually share information. It's like the biological internet. This is partly how they'll share plasmids, and they'll actually learn about their environment. This is how many microbes become resistant to antibiotics. They'll say, oh yeah, we can share that. And we know how to shift our metabolism to be immune to different antibiotics. Right? So biofilms are a big deal. Now I want to shift gears right now and talk about some of the patterns that I want you guys to look for. Right? How will you know if you have dysbiosis? How will you know if you're talking to somebody who's dealing with dysbiosis? What symptoms should you be looking for? The first one I'll say is chronic constipation. This is a common one. People used to come up to me. I used to be a health coach, and my family runs a chain of stores, so I would have a desk, and people would come up, and they would ask me nutritional advice every day, all day, for years. And one of the common ones, people would come in and say, oh, Bruce, I have all these problems. And they would sit down at my desk, and we'd go through, I'm depressed, or, I have no energy, or I can't sleep, or whatever. And often I would start talking about their bowel health, because I believe that's where almost every healing journey should begin. It's the front door, right? It's where most of the immune system is. It's where all nutrients get absorbed. It's a big part of human health. And I would often, it would surprise people, I'll tell you. Many people they'd sit down at my desk and they'd start telling me they'd give me a little health history right there. And I would often start inquiring about their bowels. And many people would say, well, Bruce, I'm pretty regular. I go every week. That's great, right? That's totally normal. Many people don't go, more than every 60 hours or something like that. It's days go by, and and that's regular, normal, right? They don't even know what is normal. I would say, there's a lot of debate about what normal bowel movement schedules are. I would say having a bowel movement every day is normal. Some people say twice a day is more the gold standard. I think that it depends. There's so many variables. But I think having an effortless, comfortable bowel movement every day is really an important part of human health. This gets into colon transit time, which we'll talk about later. But I want to say that chronic constipation used to be every doctor, every book. When I started studying nutritional science and medical stuff long ago, it used to be that everybody with chronic constipation would be told fiber, water, exercise. That's what you need. Fiber, water, and exercise. And boy, they tried that. Gastroenterologists filled medical journals with trials. There's so many studies on that. They tried it a lot. And guess how many times it worked long term? 0. Guys, chronic constipation. Let's think about it. Who digests fiber in the body? It's not you. Your pancreas does not make cellulase. You can't break down cellulose. Humans don't digest fiber, right? Fiber is not digested by the human body. What does break down fiber? Colonic bacteria, right? So can you make up for a lack of good bacteria by pounding more fiber into the colon? No. And what happens is, initially it will work. Initially. It will seem like it's helping. This kind of it's very insidious because it seems like it's helping. It expands the size of the stool, and they have more urgency, and they poop more. But pretty soon what happens is they become dependent on fiber, and they can't poop without it. And then they have to eat usually higher and higher amounts. And eventually it becomes impacted. Think about taking like 23 feet of garden hose, folding it up into a little, coil, and now take like bran cereal, get it wet in a paste, and fork as much as you can down the tube, and see how much you have to cram into there before it comes out the other side. And what will happen eventually is the first kink, where the hose bends around and comes back the other way, which is what your intestines do as they fold back, double over each other, the fiber becomes impacted. And then we see more fiber is required to get that bolus of fiber moving. And eventually it becomes like pressure stuffing a homemade sausage. Cramming the fiber in, ballooning the intestinal cell, the wall, mucosal wall. This causes hernias and hemorrhoids. And that's exactly what that research found over and over and over again. Let me go ahead and give a personal rant. I don't know if Natur-Tyme wants me to do this, but I'm doing it anyway. And that is that I'm really not a big fan of psyllium. Guys, psyllium should only be used if you are doing for anti-diarrhea. If you're using psyllium I always say this. I only recommend psyllium to people that I personally hate and want to destroy their bowel. And I want to do it slowly. Really very insidious attack on their bowel. So yeah, psyllium, what we need to do is restore the microflora, bring back that ecosystem that drives all those nerve contractions, that drives the peristaltic motion. Peristalsis is the snake-like undulation of your intestines, and it's really a very carefully orchestrated nerve contractions that orchestrate the muscles. And it turns out bifidobacteria, the family of bifidobacters, are the big thing that's lacking. And it's not always easy. You can't just always take a probiotic and all the bifidos get totally reinstalled. I don't want to say, you just take a probiotic and it always goes away. That's not my... sometimes that does happen. But more often than not, people who've had long-term constipation require more of a digestive protocol. We'll get into that. Damage to the villi is the next thing I want to talk about. You guys know what the villi are? Little hair-like projections that poke off the mucosal wall. This is where all nutrients get absorbed. We're supposed to have healthy shag carpeting, right? This is what healthy intestinal, villi look like. This is where all the nutrients get absorbed. Many Americans have more what looks like Berber carpeting. It's no longer shag. It's been flattened, blunted, crushed, layers of plaque, mucus, biofilms. How well do they absorb nutrients from here? This is where I think a lot of people walk into a store and they buy herbs and amino acids and carotenoids and minerals and vitamins without actually approaching the front door. But often their intestinal dysfunction may be partly what brought them to their ailment in the first place. And they go into the store and they're going to read all these books that's going to suggest this amino acid or this, whatever. Many people will go to the books and they'll start buying focus nutrients that have been studied for that organ or gland that they're trying to heal. But have they fixed the front door from which all those nutrients are going to enter? This is why I used to have customers in my stores, at least, who would come in and say, Bruce, I tried those amino acids and it didn't do diddly squat. And then I took those herbs and I didn't notice a thing. And then I took that multivitamin, didn't feel it. And it's like, well, sometimes that's because the intermucosal wall is not really absorbing a lot. It's not like they're absorbing zero, but they're not absorbing near as much as they should or could. I also want to talk about damage to the tight junctions. Tight junctions, this is a little more technical. I won't go super deep on this, but I do want to point them out. Tight junctions are little bonds, little protein bonds that hold your intestine together. Right? You can think of them like clasped fingers. There's little gaps between my fingers, little gaps. That's kind of like what these little bonds are right here. They hold the intestinal surface together. And what we've learned about when people have dysbiosis is that these tight junctions get damaged. Right? All these little gap junctions and tight junctions start to become, we have all this stuff now can leak, all these undigested glutens, various inflammatory proteins from your own immune system, and the microbial toxins themselves, components of their life cycle, little poisons they make. And all of that stuff will now leak into your blood and lymph. Right? Because you have, basically, tight junctions were only discovered in the late 80s. We're still learning a lot about them in medicine. What we have learned, though, is that leaky gut is real. Nowadays, it's not called leaky gut, though. Leaky gut's more the health food store term. The term in medicine is more intestinal permeability, or some people call it tight junction dysregulation. Very clinical sounding. But the idea is that when these tight junctions start to break down and you leak out all these proteins out into your blood and lymph, your immune system, which is mostly in the gut, are going to start building antibodies. It's going to send your immune system into a tailspin, trying to build antibodies against every little molecule that gets in there. And this is where your immune system is going to go, oh my God, it's going to start erratically firing at everything. And you'll become very sensitive to your foods because you'll have built antibodies against them. And every time you eat them, your immune system will become incredibly involved in those foods. And this is where you'll see people who are sensitive to all these foods. You met people who come in. I used to come into my store, and they'd have a list, like sometimes several pages. And it would be like, here's what I'm allergic to. Can you help me shop? It would be like corn, peanuts, soy, wheat, rice, tomatoes, eggs, fish. And it would just be like this huge list of foods. And it would basically be like, I can have ostrich and quinoa, and that's it. I can have nothing else. I'm here to say that, really the problem usually is not the actual foods. The problem is their gut. They need to heal and seal the tight junctions. Now, this is also becoming big news because when your tight junctions are leaking, we are finding that that's probably turning out to be a precondition that you have to have in order to develop a full-blown autoimmune disease. So far, it's 100% correlated. We have yet to find a single person who has type 1 diabetes or rheumatoid arthritis or lupus or Hashimoto's or any of those autoimmune conditions. We have yet to find one person who has a diagnosed autoimmune condition who doesn't have leaky tight junctions. So it doesn't go necessarily the other way. Everybody who gets leaky gut doesn't necessarily go on to develop an autoimmune disease. But everybody with an autoimmune disease already has leaky gut. It's pretty clear. I believe it's, as it's been called by many researchers, a precondition, something you have to have, which makes intuitive sense when you understand that most of your lymphocytes, your B cells, your T cells, your natural killer cells, most of these big important immune cells are in the gut. They are lymphoid cells. They're called lymphocytes. Very important. That's the main antibody-generating machinery of your body, right there in your gut. So when you damage that absorptive surface and start leaking out proteins, it's going to be real bad news for your immune system. Do you think this is going to play into the larger immune and inflammatory discussion? Yes, big time. Now let's talk about thyroid. I mentioned this earlier. Thyroid gland is the one up in your neck. It's the one that controls the speed of almost everything, right? It's like the idle speed controller for almost every feedback loop in your body. How much energy you have has a lot to do with your thyroid. How warm you are has a lot to do with your thyroid. How high your cholesterol numbers are has a lot to do with your thyroid. How well you lose weight has a lot to do with your thyroid. How your digestive machinery works, how much enzymes and acids you're actually secreting has a lot to do with your thyroid. Guys, here's what I wanted to point out. 20% of all thyroid hormones are converted in the gut with those enzymes. Remember I mentioned how important those enzymes are that are made in the colon? Yeah, one of them, called sulfatase, it's one of the enzymes, basically activates T4. T4 is it's the predominant hormone that your gland makes, and it has to be converted to T3 to be active. And a lot of that happens in the gut. Truly, about 1/5 of all thyroid hormones require these enzymes to be activated. This is one of the reasons, not the only reason, but it's one of the reasons why people can go to a thyroid doctor, or a regular doctor especially, and they'll have every symptom on the list of hypothyroidism. Cold hands and feet, check. Unrelenting fatigue, check. High cholesterol numbers, check. Dry skin, check. Infertility, check. Trouble losing weight, check. They'll list all these things, right? And then the doctor will say, well, I tested your thyroid gland, and it's fine. Go home. Your normal range. The range is this big. You're somewhere in there. That's fine. Anything in there is fine. It's a very clumsy way. And they're only looking at the gland. They're not looking at how those hormones get activated and converted, which happens mostly in the liver and in the gut. And the gut, over time, will damage the liver. If you allow those pathogens to grow like crazy in the gut, that will actually affect your liver big time. So between the two, it's 40% in the liver, it's 20% in the gut. That's 60% of your thyroid hormones. And that doesn't mean the gland itself is a problem. The gland may be pumping out hormones just fine. It's how well they're being activated. And doctors are not doing a good job at this. Generally, I tell people don't waste your time going to a regular general practitioner to assess any thyroid stuff. If they don't know beans about it, they'll just tell you it's fine. Unless it's really bad. If they tell you it's bad, if they diagnose hypothyroidism, that means it's really bad, right? I mean, it's way off the reference range. So let's talk about reflux because we'll get into how we fix this. So I want to talk about reflux. We're still going into identifying the patterns, and you will start to see these patterns in many people. And I want to talk about the reflux one because it's a big one. Reflux I identify it as nearly epidemic. So many people have acid reflux, and most of them who have it do not know that they have it. Because most people, in their mind, they think that the way they would know is they would have acid reflux and burning, right? It would hurt. There would actually be heartburn. That's the associated symptom. And that does happen for a lot of people, but most people don't get heartburn, even if they're refluxing like crazy. The nerves in there often are not eroded. You don't feel it. The acids aren't strong enough to really damage it, and so you don't feel the actual heartburn. What I want to talk about is how many people who have reflux actually have low stomach acidity. On television, if you watch television commercials, they're common, and they'll often have advertisements for antacid drugs, right? They make it seem as if that really acid reflux is caused by a deficiency of Prilosec. The reason you're getting heartburn is that you just failed to take enough of those drugs. And that's almost, I'm being silly, but that's really almost how they present it. You got Larry the Cable Guy jumping off a jet ski, and it makes it seem so simple. But the reality is that, most people who actually have been studied, actually, when they go to a clinic and they have heartburn or reflux and they actually do a gastric test where they measure the acidity in the stomach, about 9 out of 10 people will be found to have low acidity. Right? There are people who have too much acid, but it's actually more rare. Most commonly, it's actually too low. When I have just tried to discuss this on the aisle with people, with customers in my stores, they would often say, well, I know for me it's high because it burns like hell. That's how I know. It's definitely high, I know for me. Because it seems like such a counterintuitive thing. It seems like a medical mystery. How could you have low stomach acid and yet acid regurgitating into the esophagus? How could that happen? And I want to set the stage. Basically, guys, if you have allowed biofilms to grow and you've allowed H. pylori to grow in the stomach and you've tanked the thyroid conversion, your thyroid, when your thyroid goes down, everything slows down, including your digestive secretions, and you'll have much lower acid. In fact, when people have low acid, that's usually the first thing I want to do is rule out low thyroid. Go have them run a full thyroid panel from somebody who actually knows what they're doing. So if you have a low thyroid, or you have biofilms that have blocked some of the channels and pumps from secreting, or you have H. pylori that suppresses stomach acid, or some combination thereof, you'll have low acid. And let me point out, guys, low acid means that the digestive symphony will go awry. It will grind to a halt. Think of hydrochloric acid as the digestive trigger. That acid signals all the rest of all these little valves that open and these ducts that release bile and release enzymes and release bicarbonate. I mean, without acids, if there's not enough acid, things won't drain properly and there won't be the real full digestive machine working. So what happens to people who have low acid, and they'll have more fungus growing in their stomach, we should point out, more fungal films. What do you think happens to many Americans who eat starches and sugars and fibers that go into a nice warm stomach with fungus, and they sit there for hours because they're not going to drain in the proper amount of time because they don't have enough acid? What happens to sugars that sit with lots of fungus for hours at over 90 degrees? Yeah, they putrefy. And they produce all kinds of foam and gas and little bubbles. And those gases will go up. They have to go somewhere. And often their intestines producing gases, too. There's hydrogen and methane kind of being pushed up. And so we'll have a little trickle of weak acids and weak enzymes, not full strength, but weak diluted acids that will really trickle and be pumped. That little valve at the top of the stomach often gets damaged. We allow fungus and other molds and bad guys to attach to it. It breaks. It really does kind of weaken the valve. It's supposed to close it off and keep all the acid down low. But what's happening is they've got a little fermentation vat, and it's pushing pressure up on that little weak valve. And now it's pushing some acids and enzymes into the throat, into the swallowing tube. And usually you won't feel it. Usually your esophageal lining won't be burned that bad. So most people who have reflux don't know that they have it. The most common thing that happens is that they'll actually get the little bit of irritation in the throat and then the swallowing tube, and that irritates the membrane. And the only defense your throat can do is to pump out mucus. That's all you got. That's your only defense. Those cells are not accustomed to acid. That's not their design. And so when they get a little acid, when it's gone the wrong way and damaged it, you'll have all this mucus coming out into your throat, which brings me to the number one symptom that I want you guys to be aware of and looking for. I put it in bold. Let me demonstrate. I'm exaggerating it right now. But when people are doing that chronically, that number, and if you have to clear your throat right now, you can go ahead. I want to be clear, though, that clearing your throat is not like, you can't make a diagnosis based on somebody clearing their throat. Humans clear their throat for other reasons, too. The reality is you'll look for the chronic nature of it and look for it to be timed after they've eaten carbohydrates. That's usually a pretty dead giveaway. They'll often usually have lots of burping, belching, because of gas pressures. They're going to have a lot of wheezing and often terrible breath. It smells like fermenting trash. You're going to have often wheezing and coughing, dry cough. It will sometimes go on for years. The dry cough is because you're irritating the lungs. You're breathing in some of that hydrochloride. How well does that delicate pulmonary lining of the lungs enjoy acid mist being breathed in?
Does not enjoy that at all. And that will set you up for asthma and COPD and all these other horrible lung problems, which is exactly what we see. If you go to a pharmacist and you say, Doc, I have asthma, and I've been told to take a antacid drug. The pharmacist will say, oh, you have asthma and lung problems? You cannot take antacids. Those are contraindicated. The drug companies already know this. Anyway, guys, my point is that chronic throat clearing, burping, coughing, hacking, wheezing, belching, hoarseness, and bad breath really are. I mean, I'll tell you, I'm on a plane every week. I fly around the country every week, and I can usually find 2 or 3 people within the vicinity on the plane that I can tell are hacking, coughing, often drinking alcohol and eating refined sugars, and their breath usually smells like trash. I mean, this is an epidemic. And I want to point out, guys, that by the time people have reflux real bad, I don't want to say it's an easy thing to fix. Sometimes it can be, this to me is a red flag, that they have damaged the mucosal wall, they have damaged possibly the thyroid, likely. They've probably got pathogens growing like H. pylori and other bad guys. And this to me is a red flag. They have damaged the mucosal wall. They've damaged the gut. And as Hippocrates said thousands of years ago, they've set the stage for chronic disease. Right? So let's move on and talk about books. This is one of my favorite books. I really like this book. It's great. I recommend everybody. I try to get every health food store in the country to carry it. It's not an easy one for them to carry. It's not distributed well, but it's a great book. It's called Why Do I Still Have Thyroid Symptoms When My Lab Tests Are Normal? It's the name of the book. Dr. Karazian has been an endocrinologist for 30 years, and he sees this every day, that people walk into his clinic, and they've been told by some of their doctors that they don't have thyroid problems because they're normal range. And then he goes through and says, well, it's because the doctor didn't know how to do a test, didn't know how to read the test, didn't even run the right test. So, guys, acid reflux is a huge thing. I want to talk about skin stuff. Most skin stuff is really autoimmune diseases, a lot of them anyway, like psoriasis and eczema in particular, really are autoimmune conditions. And we already kind of talked about the link there. Autoimmunity has dysbiosis written all over it. But skin pathologies really in general also have dysbiosis written all over them. One of my favorite doctors out in Berkeley, he has a quote here. I'm still waiting to find a person who comes to my clinic who has psoriasis or eczema or rosacea or any form of chronic dermatitis who doesn't have leaky tight junctions. That would be fundamentally new, he would tell you. I mean, guys, skin stuff, again, start that healing journey in the gut. It's not going to, and I want to be clear, skin problems can have other factors too. Can it be related to vitamin D? Can it be related to stress? Can it be related, I mean, yes, there are other factors of health. I probably don't need to mention that, but I think it's worth pointing out. Today, I am presenting you guys a lecture on dysbiosis, and I think it's one of the dominant factors of human health, but it's not the only factor, right? I should make that clear. But I think it's a big one that's been underestimated. The brain is the last one I wanted to talk about in the pattern. The brain really has a lot to do with your gut. There's these big nerves that nervate these big plexus of nerves in your gut, and they connect to the brain very directly through these big nerves. And we've learned a lot about how leaky gut, when you start to develop leaky tight junctions and the immune barriers get broken down, it's turning out that means you'll have leaky brain, and the blood-brain barrier starts to become a little bit damaged too, simultaneously, even within the same day, within hours. We're now seeing lots of studies on this with animals. We're seeing a lot of research on inflammatory bowel disease patients, people who have Crohn's disease. They look at their brains and it's a mess, lots of dead white matter lesions. I mean, guys, your gut and your brain are really connected. When you damage the gut, you're damaging the brain. And this is exactly what we see. This is why kids who are C-section delivered, who are on formula, have way higher rates of ADHD and oppositional behavioral syndromes and all these problems. This is also what we see in autistic children, 100% of the time. As all these, there's one doctor who always TED Talks and all his lectures, he'll always get up there and say, show me a kid with autism. I'll show you a kid with a really messed up gut. They're Dr. Karazian. That's actually this guy. Dr. Karazian. Datis Karazian. Yeah, I mean, honestly, just go to thyroidbook.com. That's his website. He has a whole network of physicians that he works with, so you won't have trouble. But guys, there's a lot of symptoms, and I just wanted to go through that to give you some of the patterns to look for. First off, mild symptoms: gas, bloating, abdominal pain, food sensitivities, a little bit of reflux maybe. The more advanced severe would be systemic inflammation, full-blown autoimmune diseases, malnourishment. I mean, dysbiosis, this is the founder of our company, this guy worked with a lot of doctors. He's not a doctor himself. Jordan Rubin is really somebody who was a really healthy guy in college, and he started developing symptoms of Crohn's disease, where you're having like 20 bowel movements a day that are bloody and painful and all that. And then he went to all these doctors, and they were not much help. And this was in the mid-90s. They were even less helpful then than they are now. And basically, his dad was a naturopathic doctor, so they were trying all these therapies, 3 bottles a day of probiotics, crazy herbal regimens. I mean, he flew off to Germany to try these special herbs. He went to London to get Venus flytrap infusions. He slept in hyperbaric chambers. I mean, this guy, it's amazing. I've had some road trips with Jordan where we sit in the car for 3 hours, and it's just amazing to hear some of the crazy stuff that Jordan has tried. I mean, they spent over $250,000 trying to fix his gut. And what ultimately helped him after like several years of, he thought he was going to die and had all these problems. And basically, he met a man over the phone in Southern California, William Bud Keith. And William Bud Keith was like a big muscle guy who had all these kind of health protocols he was working with back in the 70s and 80s. And William basically told him, we're going to get you on a special diet. We're going to get you on a lot of specialized probiotic strains, and we're going to have you do raw milk kefir. Lots of raw milk kefir. But he also handed him a bag of what looked like black dirt, and it was actually some special soil-based probiotic organisms that really fixed his gut, along with all the other things he was doing. But this is kind of what started Garden of Life, guys. Our very first product was this product, actually a different version. This is the Primal Defense Ultra. It's the one I recommend. A lot of people try this first. Primal Defense Ultra. Primal Defense Ultra. This is a very different type of probiotic than most of what I'm going to talk about in the next 20 minutes are going to be these two lines. We have the raw probiotic line, and we have the raw probiotic care line, which is just special strains that are kind of similar. We'll talk about those. Primal Defense, though, is a different animal. Primal Defense is really, I would almost call it more of anti-infective, something that is very good at eradicating infectious material. It is really usually meant for very sick people. People who have Crohn's or colitis or staph infections or C. diff or clostridial infections, or people who are dealing with Montezuma's revenge or different types of parasites. That's usually who takes this. And a lot of people have parasites. If you have pets at home, it's nearly 100% chance. If you have cats, then it's definitely 100% chance you have parasites. Those cats, they walk on their cat litter, right? And then at night, they're on your counter and on your bedding and on really every surface you touch. So, yeah, little poop feet everywhere. What was that? Yes. Yeah, I'm not saying it will necessarily always beat every single one, but it's a very good tool to lower various pathogens and even opportunists from growing. But again, this is almost not a probiotic in the classical sense. It's really almost like the Navy SEALs of the probiotic world. It goes down there and clears back the brush and levels the landscape. And actually, some of these strains that are in here produce some antibiotic compounds. In fact, some of the new antibiotics they're making now, antibiotics are a big field right now again. Question? Some people feel like a bomb went off in their colon if they jump to 6 a day on Primal Defense Ultra. And I would not recommend starting with that kind of regimen. You'll want to start 1. Maybe some people, half a capsule. Usually that's pretty rare. I have to go that careful. But yeah, I've met them, for sure. And they usually would work up. And you'll do it with a protocol. And it's not just like, you just start taking a Primal Defense and keep eating whatever diet you want and don't support it with anything else. It's like you usually want to get a protocol going. But Primal Defense is really one of my favorite products. It's our first product from Garden of Life. I often like to do them combined. But I'll tell you, I once had somebody do I think they were doing 6 a day on this, and they were doing 2 a day on Ultimate Care, which is and they came up to me after a lecture, and they were like, Bruce, I took Primal Defense Ultra and Ultimate Care, and I didn't just go number 1 and 2. I went number 3 and 4. There were aliens coming out of my bowels. They were exaggerating perhaps, but it was really an interesting thing. it's one tool to help. We'll get into the end, and I'll give you a protocol that kind of more goes into specific recommendations. I just want to go over what tools are available from Garden of Life. I do, because I fly around the country every week. So, I mean, being in airports and hotels, and yeah, I stay on it. Yeah, I mean, some people don't. A lot of people just start with this and do like, maybe a month or 2 months, depending on how they respond to it. Honestly, if you respond with lots of gas and bloating and eructations and gurgling and all that and cramping, that's usually a good sign it's doing something, that you kind of need to slow down. You might consider adding some bentonite clay to help absorb some of the endotoxin fragments you're sending in the stormtroopers, and they're going to chop and cleave and clear back a lot of microbes, and in their destruction, they'll release all the compounds that are contained, the actual pieces of their cell wall, which are actually pretty potent toxins. So sometimes you want to be careful. Now, I don't recommend bentonite clay if you have constipation. It can slow the bowels. So there's other tools we can get into. So Primal Defense. Now, I'm mainly going to talk about our raw probiotic line. I do really love Primal Defense, but our main game tonight and what I see really helping people is often to start here, and then they may, after a month, start doing the regular raw probiotics. So let's talk about what raw probiotics are made of. Fundamentally, and we're talking both, the care line and the daily formulas, both of them start with this. They both start with Bulgarian yogurt concentrate, kind of a throwback to Metchnikoff. They also have kefir grains, which looks like a blob of cauliflower, very soft, but these are actual colonies. It's have you ever seen the floaty thing in the bottom of kombucha? It's called a SCOBY, or the mother of apple cider vinegar, an example of a SCOBY. This is the one from kefir. Kefirs kind of look like a little blob of cauliflower, but it's a symbiotic colony of bacteria and yeasts. And these are something that you eat. For humans have been eating this for thousands of years. It's really rich in good bacteria and a lot of carotenoids and cool acids and enzyme stuff. So we wanted kind of the food element. We also wanted the new school studied strains all put into one, kind of bridging the gap between the old school foods and the new school pharmacologic mind of studying strains. Right? So that's what raw probiotics are. Nowadays, probiotics are a big hit. Everybody says they're the best. We have the best probiotics. I think Bed Bath & Beyond will probably be making that claim before long. Maybe the tire shop will be talking about it. So let's talk about what to look for, because I'm not just going to tell you ours are the best because it's ours, right? I mean, I want you to know what to look for. How will you know what makes a good probiotic good? So number one, I look for high strain diversity. This to me is like the more authentic picture of what humans have been eating for hundreds of years. Think about making sauerkraut or miso or cortito at home. Are you going to end up with 2 strains? No. Only in a lab can you control it and refine it down to 1 or 2 strains, right? In nature, like when we test kefir in our lab, when we get the kefir grains, it's over 20 strains, right? Sauerkrauts are usually over 12 or 15. I mean, that's the kind of diversity that has always existed in the food supply. So I like high strain diversity. You will hear some people say, and this is totally a myth. I've heard companies claim that, you don't want that many strains because they'll compete with each other. I always want to go to one of their lectures and say, please show me one piece of evidence that that's ever been shown to be true, ever, in the history of microbiology. I've poured through Medify and PubMed. I've looked through the data. I cannot find a single example of that. Guys, this is scobies, or symbiotic colonies of bacteria and yeast, also called grains or mothers or colonies. They're symbiotic. That's why they're named scobies. We know, we've actually tested them. We can pull a bottle off the shelf, put the strains in nutrient drops, and grow them all. We know they didn't die in the pill. They don't compete. They're actually asleep in a pill. So if you ever hear somebody saying that stuff, I would generally run and fly. That person does not know what the heck they're talking about. It's all marketing. There's one company who tries to beat everybody over the head and bamboozle them with that nonsense. So strain diversity is key. I look for high cell counts. This is the first thing many people look for, and the only thing many people look for is just the cell count. How many colony-forming units, or CFUs, measured usually in billions, hopefully. If it's measured in millions, whoa, look out, that's a weak one. But remember, we have 100 trillion cells in our colon. If you're going to have a chance of shifting that ecosystem, I would suggest, remember Metchnikoff? He said 50 billion a day they were getting in ancient Bulgaria, and that was before they were doing antibiotics and pesticides and chlorine and sugar. We may need more than that. I recommend, 50 billion if you're doing typical strains. You would never do 50 billion of bacillus strains. That would be insane. But when you're talking about regular lacto and bifido type of blends, which make up most of the probiotic market, then I would recommend 50 billion and up. So high cell count. And also, when you're looking at the cell count on a product, make sure they're guaranteeing it. It should say on the back that this is guaranteed through expiration. It should not say at the time of manufacture, because often we'll have a little asterisk that will say, this is like a snapshot. We're only publishing the claim of the potency based on what was there when we made it. Then we're shipping it out into the trucks and warehousing and store. And did we test the strains? Do we know how fast they're degrading? Do we know how quickly they degrade in different heat or humidity ranges? Good companies will do that type of testing, and they'll guarantee their strains. We're not the only one, but we're one of the best. So high cell counts, big strain diversity, free of binders and fillers, weird polymers. You know, I see a lot of probiotics that have like titanium dioxide and silica and all these weird coatings. And I want to talk about enteric coating. This is another marketing myth. Guys, remember the Bulgarians who were living so long? Did they wrap their yogurt in cellulose polymers? No, nobody's ever done that. Speaking of enteric coating, is there a lot of clinical data that's shown that to be really successful? Like we've got tons of human trials on that, right? Not a single one that's ever been published. There's test tube trials, and companies have tried to bamboozle people into saying, well, we bathed the bacteria in heavy concentrations of acid and they died. So therefore, they're all going to die in your stomach. The reality is, I don't think that's true at all. Number 3, the coatings themselves. What are they made out of? They do involve heat to seal the coating. You're involving heat in a manufacturing process on your bacteria. And furthermore, I think we're going to find out it's actually a disadvantage to make sure they pass through the stomach intact. I think we're going to learn that we want some lactobacilli in the lower stomach because it may help prevent the growth of H. pylori. Turns out humans eating cultured food all those hundreds and hundreds and thousands of years, we may have adapted to that a little bit. Gosh, who would have thought? I'm not a fan of enteric coating. It's not to say that enteric coating means it's a bad product. It just means the company's using a marketing gimmick. It can still be a good product even despite the stupid coating. Finally, shipped cold. Good companies will ship cold. They will not ship over the weekend. They will not let it sit in a UPS or a FedEx warehouse all week. They're going to ship in coolers. They're actually going to do testing. We spent like $800,000 just to make the facility where we ship it from. So it's always temperature and humidity controlled, always under 40 degrees Fahrenheit, always under 30% humidity. I mean, that's what you want to look for. Look for high strain diversity, big cell counts, with no fillers, real clean, and shipped cold. Question? Yeah, like this one. This one does not have to be refrigerated because the main strain in here is not lacto or bifido, right? Like these are bifidobacterium and lactobacillus. It's those two families, those two genuses. This guy uses bacillus and Saccharomyces strains, totally different family members from normal probiotics. The main strain here, actually, I've seen lab reports where they've microwaved it. You buy a good company that really does their testing and does their homework and knows which strains will survive. Most companies don't use bacillus. They'll just take regular strains and they'll put them on the shelf and they'll overformulate. So they'll say, we guarantee 25 billion, but they have put 60 billion in there, so that by the time it's just a kinetic of decline, right? It's like it's slowly degrading on the shelf, and by the time you buy it, they're hoping it's still above that label claim. This is also typically why you don't find these kinds of potencies. Like you don't find a 400 billion outside the fridge because they couldn't maintain that potency for the next year and a half. Does that make sense? Heat does not kill them, just so we all are clear. Heat just speeds up their life cycles. Once their life cycle, and they're cold in the fridge, they're basically asleep. They're dormant. Their life cycle is so slow, they're not doing anything. Once they then heat, they start really working and eating and feeding. Do you think there's infinite fuel inside the capsule? They can just eat and eat and eat and eat and never starve? Well, no. There's only finite resources inside that capsule, so if they get hot, they will start to degrade. I'm realizing I need to speed up a little bit. I'm taking a little more time than I had planned. So I do want to kind of get to my healing protocol. And I just want to say, guys, this care line that we've introduced is all about the best strains in the business. We've really tried to license very, very good strains. So this is the first one I want to introduce, Colon Care. You'll see it has safe deposit numbers on the strains. The other line doesn't do this. This is unique to the Care line, the colorful boxes. The daily formulas don't have this type of strains. But these safe deposit numbers refer to specific strains within the species, right? Sometimes you can have two members of the same species next to each other that look very different and behave very differently. Here's a good example. We have two dogs. They're both in the same species. Imagine I'm just recruiting them based on the species name. I tell the recruiter, I want Canis domesticus. Well, that's very vague, right? What if I just say, I want Lactobacillus acidophilus? Well, there's many different members of acidophilus, right? Are you going to get the ones with big, strong teeth and huge, Irish Wolfhound strain? Or are you going to get the teacup poodle strain? They're both the same species. You see the problem with just labeling an acidophilus? It's very vague. So nowadays, you're seeing companies that are really starting to label their strains. And this is the most studied acidophilus in the history of the market, where basically, this strain we're using, not the formula, but the strain we've included. There's a study on this one where they took people who are just a wreck. They're going once a week, 60-hour transit times and stuff. And by the end of a 14-day trial, we got them to go every day. We got their pooper to move every day. That's really a nice thing. It's all a bunch of bifidobacteria strains. This is also the one for IBS. We have a great study on pain looking at IBS people. This is really the one I would recommend for anybody with irritable bowel syndrome. Irritable bowel is not a mechanical problem. It's turning out it's actually a gut-brain axis signaling issue. It's really where the volume of the signals, the pain circuits in the gut are turned up loud, and they're sending exaggerated signals to the brain. Normal people, healthy people, get gas bloating too, but we're barely aware of it when it's not happening. Whereas people with IBS, they're doubled over. They're getting very loud signals. It's mainly their endorphins are kind of broken. The endorphins are what can turn on pain signals. So this was a study that actually showed that we can help those IBS sufferers. Really an amazing thing. This was one of the best studies I've ever read. We had found this strain. It's called NCFM. On our label, it's SD5221. It's a safe deposited strain. But this NCFM acidophilus from North Carolina is a really good, the most studied acidophilus ever in the history of microbiology. It has a lot of great studies. This is my favorite. But basically, we wanted to put some of the best strains ever for pain, gas, bloating, and chronic constipation. We wanted to put all those strains into one formula called Colon Care and combine it with enzymes. So it has some extra plant-based digestive enzymes added. Yeah, for some people. Now, it depends. There's honestly so many protocols. It depends on how bad they were and how serious they are. I'm a retailer, right? So I represent my customer. When they're in the store, I'm trying to look out for them and give them the best tools. But sometimes they're not going to spend $80 on two different products. And so I'm going to have to kind of be like, well, which one is, the best bet? And maybe if it's just chronic constipation, I might just go Colon Care. They're saying I'm itchy skin, toenail fungus, I had blastocystis, some parasite. That's when I might do Primal Defense. More for people that are either going overseas and want to prevent infections, or people who already have like MRSA or staph or C. diff, or people with Crohn's disease. I would say this is the more one for chronic constipation. Then we'll get to that. Yeah, we'll go to the other ones. So before I get to the diarrhea one, let me talk about the vaginal care. This is really a product designed for urogenital infections. When you study urogenital infections in women, yeast infections, kidney and bladder overgrowth, or just all kinds of fungal vaginitis or bacterial vaginosis, we find that they're almost all caused by one of three bad guys. Usually it's one of the three. It's either Candida, or E. coli, or Proteus mirabilis. Those are the three that cause like 99% of all women's urinary tract and urogenital infections are usually one of those three. So we basically put together a big blend of strains that had been studied against those specific three bad guys. And so what you're seeing is a bunch of blends that these bacteria produce acids. That's not too unique. A lot of them do. But these guys were selected because they produce bacteriocins, which are like kind of tools that degrade other microbes. They also produce hydrogen peroxide, which can kind of be something that's kind of a microbial combat type of tool. And then there's surfactants, which actually prevent them from sticking to the mucosal wall. This can help for biofilms. So, question? Yes. You can open up the capsules and put them on the tongue right before bed. That's a good way to do it. Thrush is a biofilm. Really, the most important thing is to be consistent. Many people, if they're trying to time the dose very, very carefully, they'll miss it because they're being so rigid with their dose schedule. You know what I'm talking about, right? Where it's like, I got to take it 30 minutes after meals. Then it's like an hour after your meal, you're like, oh crap, I forgot. Okay, well I'll do it tomorrow. Then tomorrow you forget, and then it's like you're taking it every 4 days, and it's just not going to do as much. I think generally with meals is probably the best, but I don't think it matters all that much. Some people take an empty stomach, get great results. There's studies all over the map, to be honest. But your antibiotics. Yeah. No, actually, most of them. I mean, these actually make some vitamins, and minerals are partly used in their metabolism. As long as you don't. I mean, you wouldn't want to take like huge doses of like there are certain minerals that if you were taking major like high potency 1,000 milligrams of this or that, it probably still wouldn't degrade them all that much because it's diffusing it into the liquid of your digestive tract, and so you're not like metals can degrade bacteria. If I took a petri dish of calcium or magnesium or zinc or selenium or sodium, and I dropped bacteria into that with a huge concentration or molarity of minerals, it's going to degrade the cell. But your bowel is not like a petri dish that's saturated in a single mineral, so you usually don't have too much to worry about there. So we do include enzymes in this to break down the outer shell. Many bad critters develop like a spore membrane that's made mostly of fiber. So we put fiber-digesting enzymes to tear off their fibrous coatings and let all the acids and enzymes and peroxides work on them. Question in the back? Well, this actually has the enzyme. So when you look at this formula, you'll see a yeast digesting enzyme blend. So it's kind of rolled. These care line ones, that's one of the big differences from the original daily line. The daily line didn't use any specialized enzymes, except for digesting dairy. Because there's a little bit of dairy in there, very little, but we had a little bit in there to help you break it down. These use yeast digesting enzymes more particularly. So each one has like its own formula. I'm going to move on and talk about, and I should mention for vaginal care, this one's great for men. A lot of men have toenail fungus, jock itch, itchy skin, toenail fungus, cravings for alcohol and sugar. They love beer. They get bloated when they drink it. That's a pretty good sign. They could really use vaginal care. I will say they have to be very confident in their masculinity to walk out of a store with a pink box that says vaginal care on it. So there is that. I want to move on to the last two. And these last two are really more for your diarrheal side. And they're really more for people who are taking antibiotics. In fact, what they call co-therapy. Co-therapy is a term where you're taking antibiotics and probiotics on the same day. A lot of research on that over the years. We found it's a very good idea. Try to separate the dose. I recommend at least 2 hours. But for some people, actually in these studies, it's interesting. When you read some of these papers that are on co-therapy, many of the doctors don't even know when to recommend. They're not into probiotics. They don't know this stuff. So they just tell the patient to take it. And the patient takes a probiotic and an antibiotic, sometimes in the same mouthful of water. Boom. And it still worked. It still held down the fort and prevented a lot of disruption. I mean, the whole point here is that antibiotics will degrade a lot of certain species and really knock them down and allow other bad guys to get a leg up. So if we can put a good force of probiotics in there during the antibiotic therapy, it will really hold down the fort and prevent that, what they call disruption of the fecal microbiota. This is when people go on antibiotics, it can be 6 months later, their bowel is still way down. So it can be a profound thing. So this one is Ultimate Care. It's in a capsule. We also make the same blend in a powder called 5-Day Max Care. This one does not have any prebiotic fibers in it. This one has a lot of prebiotic fibers in it. That's why the scoop is so big. When you look at that Replenish blend, again, this is more the one I would say for diarrhea, the Ultimate Care. And I think this one is really this is kind of like DEFCON 5. This is like when they want the strongest probiotic that money can buy on the market. And they want to get a lot of cells from a lot of different species that's shipped cold with lots of prebiotics to really help grow the bacteria. If you don't know what prebiotics are, Inulin is one we're using. It's made from Jerusalem artichokes. And these artichokes have a lot of these certain fibers that are really good fuel. It's like a fuel source that the bacteria can use to grow and proliferate. We also put banana powder, makes it taste good. So that's what these are. These are specialized blends that have been a lot of research on them, and they're really meant for people who have these specific conditions, whereas the daily formulas are just everyday, more of a maintenance, preventative type of thing. Question in the back. Right. I would go the men's formula, and that's a 3 a day, and you may find that you can do 1 a day even, depending on, if you're making cultured food at home and you don't live on a lot of sugar, you never eat fast food, you've not had digestive problems, you have pretty effortless, regular bowel movements, then I would do 1 a day of the raw probiotic for men, which means that will be a 3-month supply, because you're not doing the full serving. But think about doing 1 a day of our raw probiotics. That means you're going to get at least 27 billion, because you're getting a third of this. It's 85 from a full 3. You're going to get at least 27 billion from 30 strains shipped cold for about $12 a month. That's going to be a very economical way to go. A lot of people need more than that. But if you're already, many people are like you, are pretty healthy, don't have a lot of problems they're trying to address. They just want to prevent problems and kind of keep good amounts of bacteria in their intestine. And that's when I might recommend just 1 a day. Men's 1. Yeah, it's honestly, they're so hemmed in by the laws that they can't. It's honestly going to be a lot of talk to your doctor. Yeah, they might know a lot more about them. Generally, again, I'll try to kind of give you the basic breakdown. The daily lines, which I wish I had a picture of them all. Maybe I do at the end. No, I don't. There's a different deck. Yeah, it's like 20 slides back. So I wanted to talk about that the daily lines are what I would recommend for somebody like what he's just described, where if you're not having any problems right now, you don't have food sensitivities or reflux or any thyroid problems or any digestive functional problems, and you're having comfortable, effortless bowel movements, those are all pretty good signs your bowel is in pretty decent shape. And then we don't need to really go aggressive on a probiotic regimen for that case. For a lot of people, they do have reflux. They do have all these kind of issues. Sometimes they're trying to repopulate their intestine from years of having problems. So it kind of depends on where you're at. And I would suggest, to kind of run through the care line, we have the Max Care. Well, this is really meant for people who are coming off of a cleanse or who are going on antibiotics or who are really trying to jumpstart a reinoculation protocol. They're just going to go really, it's like blitzing the intestine with lots of bacteria, with lots of fuel for them. Ultimate Care is basically the same without the prebiotic fibers, so it doesn't have the fuel. Prebiotics are like fibers that are like little rafts that help them grow. It's like feeding the troops, putting the fuel in their capsule. There's only 5 scoops. It's actually 6. We overfill it, 1 per day. That's a pretty aggressive regimen to really It's all about repopulating is what this one's about. After they've wrecked the bowel with antibiotics or years of a train wreck American diet, this is maybe one they'll start with. Often they won't stay on this, though. They'll do 1 or maybe 2, 5 days or 10 days. Well, all probiotics build your immunity, but it's not like primal defense. Primal defense is really, this is very different. Did we get your question, though, that if you're not dealing with anything serious, I would just go with kind of the daily line for your age and gender. If you're looking at, really knocking down serious infections, I would go primal defense. If it's urogenital stuff like yeast and E. coli, I would go vaginal care. If it's, chronic slow transit time, go with the green box. Think of the green box. We don't do it on purpose, but I think of like green light. It's a green box, go. Make the bowels move. Hope you remember. Question? So there's not a lot of research specifically. Okay, we'll get into that. Yeah. That's what I like to do. Yep, or ultimate care, colon care or ultimate care, depending on whether their bowels are more on the loose side or more on the like stuck side. That's where I'd go more colon care now. Yep. Yeah. Or start both together. You can do that. I would start slow on both, like 1 and 1. Don't jump up to like 3 and 3 or anything like that. Yeah. Question? I think she was in the back. I believe a lot of people can start with primal. Guys, there isn't total knowledge. Even in the edge of science has not discovered ultimately what will always be the best. Like, I won't be able to know your specific bowel ecology because we're all truly unique little snowflakes. Even identical twins, within 6 hours, their bowels look different. So by the time you've lived 20, 30 years or what have you, your bowel has shifted in thousands of ways. It's kind of like how two forests are never exactly the same. They have slightly different bugs, slightly different microbes, slightly different trees, slightly different flowers, slightly different birds. That's a lot less difference than how much your intestine would differ from other humans even, because we actually have a lot more speciation. So it's impossible for me to say with any degree of certainty that primal defense is always the one to go with. But I think they're a great tool, and I think a lot of people, you can kind of tinker with it and see what works best for you. And I hate to say that's kind of where we're at in medicine, but that's honestly a lot of drug therapy is done that way too. Guys, I'm going to run through my healing protocol. I know the hook is about to come out and pull me off the stage, so I just want to run through this protocol really quickly. This is a 4-step protocol that I've worked with for years. Each one begins with the letter R, so I call them the 4 Rs. The first step is remove. If you're going to have a chance to heal, you cannot be eating lots of flour and wheat and sugar and insoluble fibers. The flour is the hardest one. Remember, that means pasta, pizza, sandwiches, cereals, breads. For many Americans, that's what they live on. So when I say they can't have that, and it's not the rest of their life here we're talking about during the healing period of restoring their gut flora, going off flour. Flour is very sticky and glue-like, very fermentable, very damaging. Insoluble fibers are like a rough wire brush on a wounded surface. Well, insoluble fibers are not bad for you, but if your bowel's all raw and inflamed and damaged, you don't want insoluble fibers scraping on it. Right? Broccoli peels, or broccoli stalks, peels on fruits. Yeah, flax seeds have some insolubles. Oatmeal's mostly soluble. It's like absorbs water like a sponge, right? That's soluble. Those are pretty insoluble. The seeds themselves, when you bite them, you notice how they're like. Think of things that are like you poop them out and they're still in your poop. Those are insolubles. You cannot break them down. I mean, those are a mix. I mean, most things are a mix of soluble and insolubles, but it depends. Yeah, sun butter. I mean, once they mill it all down real fine, there's very little insolubles left. I mean, it depends on the person. You don't have to go like, I can't have 1 microgram of, it's not, you have to be that alerted. It's just, in general, cut the stalks off your broccoli and peel your fruit, whatever. Does that make sense? So that's step 1. Step 2, re-inoculate. I hope I've articulated why that's important. I recommend 50 billion a day or up. I also recommend making cultured food at home. Try it. Yeah, your own yogurt. Your own sauerkraut. A starter? Yeah, the raw probiotic capsules, just open them up. They're not, in addition. Yeah, in addition. They're not worthless, but they're starting from pasteurized milk, and they're adding, like, you'll see usually pectin or starch or something added. They're not doing long fermentations. I mean, I would honestly say anything you buy in a store, I hate to admit this, but it's not the same thing as what was made in traditional Greece. That's like raw milk with, right. No, it's not worthless. I recommend, eating those. Especially because they're fun to eat. I love Greek yogurt. It's so good. Ruined me on other yogurts. I can't eat anything else anymore. Yeah, kimchi, wonderful. Kefirs, great. Miso soups, tempeh. There's hundreds of cultured foods from all over the world. So that's step 2. Step 3 is replace. This is a multi-pronged one. So first part of step 3 is to use some kind of betaine, hydrochloric acid. Betaine is just another name for stomach acid. Specifically, the main part is HCl, hydrochloride. Betaine hydrochloride. This is actually stomach acid in a pill. There are many brands. We do not sell this, but I put a picture of Now brand. There are many good brands. Nature's Life, Solaray. Just make sure it's a capsule, not a tablet. Tablets don't break down fast enough. You need to move. You're getting into the stomach quick. You also need it to have pepsin. Most of them do. There's only a few I've seen that don't. But always make sure it's a capsule. Always make sure it has pepsin. And you have to work up your correct dose. If you just take one with meals, it's a waste of time. Don't even bother. If you're trying to replace stomach acid, you're going to need to take, usually in my experience, it's 6 to 9 capsules with each high-protein meal. That's actually a lot less stomach acid than your stomach would normally make if it were healthy. This is not the rest of your life. I know it's not, wait a minute, I'm taking 9 pills every meal? Good Lord. It's really what you're doing is you're working up to establish where the correct dosage is. So the first day you'll start with 1. The third day you'll go up to 2. Fifth day you'll go up to 3. Seventh day you'll go up to 4. At one point, you'll reach, usually it's around 6, 5 to 8, somewhere in there. They'll take one more on that interval, and they'll notice they feel a little more burning, a little more discomfort, a little heaviness, a little hotness. Not to where it's like panicking, fire alarm type stuff, but just a little extra discomfort. Then you've realized you've taken too much hydrochloride, and it's time to back down by 1 capsule. You've now reached the proper, you want just enough. So you're basically titrating up your dose to find out which is the correct dosage for your body. Now, if you can take 10 and it doesn't burn, then go back to like 6 or 8. Don't just take, some people can take 25 with a meal and it doesn't burn them still, which in that case, it's going to be too expensive to maintain that. But I will say that taking betaine with meals sometimes can change lives because all of a sudden you're digesting protein, you're suppressing H. pylori, you're absorbing minerals again. Sometimes you're clearing out biofilms. And absorbing protein and minerals can often help the thyroid gland, which then starts resuming normal production. And suppressing H. pylori allows normal production. And clearing out biofilms allows normal production. So sometimes what I'm saying is that taking hydrochloric acid can actually sort of train the stomach to resume making its own acid in a way. This is Now brand. It's a nice, cheap, pretty inexpensive. When you're buying betaine, it's not like they're all the same, basically. So it doesn't really matter what brand. Just make sure it's not a tablet, always a capsule, and always make sure it has pepsin. Most of them do. Yeah, don't ever open up the capsules. That is not. How long? Depends on the person. It'll start to burn, and you'll slowly work down. As your stomach resumes its normal acid. I don't take it ever. Not anymore. Again, this is a digestive protocol that's not like, you stay on this for the next 10 years. I am not saying that. It may be a few months. And some people, if they have low thyroid, they may need it until they address the thyroid stuff, and it could be Hashimoto's, that's the most common autoimmune disease. If they don't address the Hashimoto's, they'll need to stay on betaine the rest of their life. That's not a very elegant way to go about therapy. But if they're totally unwilling to approach their thyroid, or if there's some other issue going on, if there's like pituitary inflammation or something like that. There are other links in the chain that can be a problem. But I will say, sometimes replacing betaine. So next up, enzymes. Guys, enzymes are really important. Think of enzymes like these are digestive enzymes, 2 of my favorite brands. And basically, these help break down food in the stomach and help that gastric drainage. Because if foods aren't properly broken down, because you have a low thyroid or because you have biofilm or because you have H. pylori, those would be the most common ones, then your foods will sit there for much longer. Enzymes help break everything down and allow it to drain more effectively. So don't price shop enzymes. If you walk in and buy the cheapest enzyme you can find, you'll usually get a chewable papaya enzyme. Those are, to me, worthless. I've never seen anybody do much with those ever in my life. I don't even know why we sell them in the stores, to be honest. They taste good. I guess that's about the best I can. Yeah, and I think right in the middle or right at the end of meals. Some people take it in the beginning. That probably works too. But I think in the middle or end is best. Usually the betaine, the hydrochloric acid, is taken in the beginning. Question? Well, this is going to hopefully correct those absorption issues, because often the absorption issues themselves are caused by a lack of digestive fire that breaks down everything. You can't absorb anything without enzymes and acids. Does that make sense? So this is the actual where. Oh, you're saying like when you take drugs, you have to take a higher dose of aspirin or a higher. Yeah, some people have different constitutions. Acids typically, I would say you don't usually go way higher, doubling up on that. Enzymes, sometimes people require more amounts, and you can kind of tinker with it. But if you're using really strong ones like these, I mean, the strongest enzyme is ours. And I don't mean that just because I work for the company. It's just look at the, I invite you to compare the activity levels on the bottle, right? And it's not to say, this is a great enzyme, but this is actually even stronger. And not just stronger in protease, and not just stronger in amylase or xylanase. It's stronger in every enzyme. It's also the biggest spectrum. I mean, this is a practitioner level enzyme. So we're really trying to break down food, make sure it gets properly assimilated. Question. Yeah, apple cider vinegar can work kind of like this, but it's way weak. I mean, it's not even close to, it's not even 1/10 the acidity of this. It's more for symptoms. And it will help people understand that the real strategy they need to do is acid replacement. And it can work. Well, that gets into capitalism. I mean, it's very hard to convince a man of something when his salary depends upon him not understanding it. And that's the great Upton Sinclair's quote, and I think it's very appropriate here. The evidence is there, but they just don't want to read it because, I mean, really, the doctor would have to get in and spend an hour with you talking about your whole diet and lifestyle and all these things that your doctor has not really been trained for. And they can't, I mean, a pill just can't fix this. And that's why drug therapy is not going to probably change anytime soon. Totally depends. But I would say what's even more expensive is a lifetime of suffering that ends in cancer or heart disease or dementia. I imagine if you bought everything I'm suggesting, I imagine you could spend over $150, probably under $200. Well, no, most of these would go, I mean, it depends. Like, it's hard to say because it's like, did you get on Primal or did you, because you can get Primal and even what stores have and what discounts are available changes from store to store, and you know, sometimes we run a special on probiotics, and you know, so it's very difficult to say. I mean, I would say $100 a month can be life-changing. Yeah, I mean, I train in stores. Yeah, for 90 of them. Yeah, let me finish. Yeah, we'll come back to your, we'll kind of round it out. I got like 10 minutes left or less. I'm actually a little over. Bitters are my last part of step 3. We've talked about, first, remove. If you're going to heal from dysbiosis, you can't be causing a fermentation vat every day. Number 2, re-inoculate. Put those good bacteria in. Start rebuilding that ecosystem. Number 3, replace. And I've talked about acids and enzymes. Finally, I like bitters. Bitters are something that over time mean you'll take less acids and enzymes. Bitters, such as, you know, there's a lot of good ones. You can use green drinks. They have some bitter compounds that actually do stimulate good gastric secretions. What I'm trying to say is that using bitters, like herbs like angelica and gentian and wormwood, they're bitter. They taste bitter. They actually will stimulate your liver and pancreas and gallbladder to actually help secrete. And that can, over time, mean you'll need less acids and enzyme replacement because your own body will start making them. Yeah, I do them either before a meal or after. No, I think they're a big part of the healing protocol. Yeah, this is all meant to be done together, everything I'm mentioning. Last stage is called repair. This is where I'm a big fan of stock. I put a picture of beef stock. You guys ever had traditional soup stock, like they used to make in France for hundreds of years? Yeah, this will not work for that, so they'll just have to skip this part. But basically, I'll tell you honestly, I have never found anything that's near as healing as traditional stock, ever. I wish there was something else, because it is, you know, it does involve cooking animal bones down and getting all the collagen and gelatin out. It's very, very high in proline and glycine. These are 2 amino acids, proteins, that really help repair and rebuild the mucosal wall. Glutamine would be the other one I recommend in pretty heavy dosages. Glutamine is another amino acid that actually is heavily employed or used by the intestinal cells for fuel to repair themselves. Raw egg yolks only if they're from pasture-raised healthy chickens. Dump the whites down the drain because they taste like mucus. I recommend, it depends on the person. You're talking about bone stock? I mean, again, if they have serious issues, and you'll see people who have the whole pattern. They'll have the and they have itchy skin, and they have, foggy brain and thyroid stuff and all these problems, then I would recommend stock every day. It should be a staple of calories during the healing period. Like some people do it for, again, it depends on where you started, and it also depends on what type of, for somebody who's like still eating refined sugars and grains, then I would go for about a month and see how you do. Usually after 3 to 5 weeks. Yeah, chicken is the easiest. Yeah, just take a whole chicken, roast it in the oven, take off all the breast and a lot of the meat that you're going to eat, and then take all the bones and the... Some places sell those. Yeah, or just get online and look for soup bones. They're out there. So, 6 hours or more. Usually just fill the stock pot up and put the cover on and just let it simmer on low for 6 hours. Yeah, you can definitely use a crock pot. Pressure cookers do it the fastest. Yeah, the pressure cookers definitely speed it up. Some people do it overnight. Honestly, my wife, she'll turn it on low, so nothing can really catch fire. It's just a big stock pot sitting on low, and she'll go to sleep. And then the next morning, it's like, oh, the stock's ready. You do have to do a little skimming, because as you cook it, some particulates will rise, and you want to take a little strainer and skim them off. At the very end, when you put it in the fridge, and you'll strain off all the bones and pan drippings and skin and all that, you'll have stock, which you can then incorporate into any soup or stew, and it will taste amazing. It will make every soup you've ever made taste way better. But mainly, it's just the most healing component ever to the gut. I also recommend getting vitamin A, and I recommend, this is another one that's, I hate to say, has to come from animals. Vitamin A is not made by plants. We have carotenoids, which can become vitamin A, but they must be converted, and that requires healthy conversion. Do you think people looking at this protocol have healthy conversion? Often not. So they can eat a wagon load of carrots and green vegetables and still be deficient in vitamin A. You need vitamin A to rebuild the mucosal wall. If you're vitamin A deficient, all bets are off. Or from egg yolks or cheese or butter or liver or whatever. Just get vitamin A. Make sure your vitamin A status is not totally depleted, whatever form you get. Usually the more pasture-raised, like cheeses, organic cheeses is what I would recommend. Try to stay away from processed cheese. That's the main thing. Yes? Generally, if you're sensitive to a whole list of foods, then trying to avoid all of those will mean you're going to eat a very malnourishing diet. If you're down to roots and water, you're never going to heal, because that's not a... Because the point is to actually repair the mucosal wall. And, truly, some people, it's like they have to. Otherwise, they would just starve to death. So I feel like there's no choice. You have to eat those foods to live. You have to repair the mucosal wall. Yeah, well, yeah. Are you doing stock every day with like 10 grams of glutamine and bitters and 10 grams or more? Good. Okay. You have to tinker with this. This, guys, by the way, this is a template. This is not like rigid. I think generally it lowers inflammation. If you can get more fatty foods that are non-fermentable and are pretty moisturizing to the villi, like egg yolks and bone stock soup and stews and soups and things like that, then usually it lowers inflammation of the bowel and starts to begin some better absorption. So last is all the mucoloid herbs, slippery elm, blueberries, marshmallow. Ginger and fennel are good antispasmodics that can lower gas. Barberry is known for parasites. Raspberry is a toner. You can add omega-3 fatty acids, manuka honey. There's so many different repairing tools out there, but I think these are some of my favorites. Guys, I'm way out of time. I want to thank you so much for coming out today. I hope this was useful.